Welcome to the 34th podcast. Today, our guest was born in Killeen, Texas. As the son of a naval officer, he earned his title of Military Brat, moving across various states in the U.S. during his youth, before finally moving to Japan and graduating from Kinnick in 2004. After high school, he spent a couple of years traveling in Asia and performing music before joining the military in 2007. He served on the Ballistic Missile Submarine USS Nevada as a nuclear reactor operator. After the Navy, he went on to work as an engineer technician for Intel in Phoenix, Arizona, repairing plasma etching equipment from semiconductor manufacturing process. While in Arizona, he fell prey to one of the dreaded American plagues of gun violence, receiving a bullet to the chest. After recovery, he took a couple of years away from his career and traveled to the major metropolitan areas, exploring the political, economical, mental, and cultural issues surrounding America. He then turned his focus back to his career, moving to Austin, Texas, becoming an equipment engineer for Cypress Semiconductor. In Austin, he is researching the importance of the electrical quality and coherence of food and water and its effect on mental and physical health. He also mentors men and youth on self-awareness on how to avoid the cultural pitfalls of America that will prohibit their version of success in the future. Via these, he intends to start a nonprofit that tackles some of what he observes as the base issues plaguing America. Welcome to the podcast, Brenden.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Thank you. Man, it's good to hear from you. I've been seeing your podcast and I'm excited I'm finally on here, so I can tell you that.
Yeah, first guest from the base, one of the bases, right? Technically, I know you guys aren't Tokyo, but in the Kanto Plains areas, just to sort of reiterate, the schools that sort of were involved in the Kanto Plain athletics were you guys, Kinnick. We also, Yokota, again, not close, but Yokota was often involved. And Zama as well, right? They're not close, but again, I felt like they were part of sort of our Kanto Plains, family. Yeah, we go back a far ways. I think about 20 years ago, I think you beat me quite a few times in track and field. And
I think so. I might have got lucky a couple times.
So I do have this vivid memory of you as a track and field athlete as well as an American football athlete. Fortunately, I wasn't on the losing side for American football because the joke's on you. I didn't even play American football. So
makes that one easy.
And today, there's quite a few things to touch upon, right? Your experience traveling around playing music, your mentorship programs in Austin, as well as your experience in the Navy. But I think we'll take this one chronologically. Your experience at Kinnick, you move around in the United States, as quote unquote the military brat. People are familiar with usually in the international scene. You end up at Kinnick. When did you start at Kinnick, and when did you finish?
So I showed up at Kinnick 2001. It was my sophomore year. It was a surprise, for my parents at least, telling me I was moving overseas, and showing up to Japan and realizing I was actually going to be going to school there was at that time it was surreal. I showed up. I think I played my first basketball game within 2 days of me showing up that weekend. The coach had already been told that me and my brother were showing up there, and I remember we jumped into that game and I couldn't even breathe during the game because the air quality was different in Yokosuka. Just because of just the elevation changes from where I was, and it's a different part of the country. So here, me and my brother were huffing and puffing trying to get to this game, and we were miserable at that game. Almost felt like we weren't going to get picked up for the team just because of how horrible we did. It kind of set our tone there. Kinnick is a Department of Defense school, as you said, part of the big three, as you said, Kinnick being affiliated with the Navy, Sama being affiliated with the Army, and Yokota being affiliated with the Air Force. So we were right there in Yokosuka. I think I graduated with maybe 350 people on the deck of the Kitty Hawk. It was, again, another surreal experience.
And growing up there, I guess because you were on the military base, how was your experience like in comparison to other international schools? Because you guys were technically an American property, although you were in Japan. So what was that sort of juxtaposition of like being in America, but not really?
I almost felt like it gave you a little cave, like a home to go to, right? So I was still in another country, but I still had my American culture system grounded within the fabric there. So I think it helped my mother, I guess, calm her worries. Let me explore a little bit. I wasn't in America with a lot of the problems that come with being here as a child. And she trusted Japan. So I think, there would be weekends I would just disappear. I would tell my mom I would be gone for the weekend. I would grab a train ticket. I'd point to somewhere on a map. And that's where I was going that day. So it was this back and forth dynamic that I got to have, that it was like me jumping into a different country every day and still going back home to America at night. It's a weird dynamic, but it allowed me to really explore Japan from a different perspective, I guess.
And you mentioned the Dodds, the big three. I'm curious, with the Dodd schools, do you guys have sort of a network of alums once you graduate? And, do people return to the military quite often like you did?
People actually tend to join the military quite often, and people tend to get comfortable living around the cities that military bases come from. Just the cities have their own different culture and way of life, I guess, if you want to put it that way. So you tend to get comfortable with that. So with just how small tight of a community we are, you also end up running into a lot of people. Like I've personally run into, just from my own military travels, into a lot of friends that I had from high school that, I didn't know they would be on the base. I'd be walking to go to Burger King and they'd be sitting there. And I'm like, hey, I haven't seen you since high school. So it's one of those, it's a small world things. It proves itself true. So
upon graduation, you decide to travel Asia playing music. We've never spoken about this, so I'm actually really curious what exactly it sounds like something out of a movie, but what were you doing for
well, I think it surprises people because I was known as the athlete and while I was at Kinnick. I played for football, ran track, was with you running track and basketball. I made the decision I was going to go to college, Southern Methodist University, and try to walk on the track team there. But 2004, when I decided to attend there, was the year that they cut their team because of Title IX. That's the year their football team came back from the death penalty. So I came back to Japan after that, and I decided that I did want to go to college at that time. I didn't want to waste my parents' money. I knew I wasn't going to really put the focus into it. Actually, more interested in music. Music is what was really what my passion in high school was. I was in show choir as well, and we would still be part of the Concert Playing Association choirs there. So I was part of the choir where they get it's just like the athletics there. But they gather chairs from all the different schools. You come together and they do the same thing for band and orchestra. But it's just another networking thing for meeting people from other schools. So that's why I met so many of y'all from schools like ASIJ and that were around the Concho Plains there. So after high school, I decided that I wanted to start pursuing my music, I guess. After Southern Methodist, at least, I got together with a group of guys. One who's actually just came out with an album last year. Name is Buddha Monk. Y'all should go check out his album. Derek, or at least in Yokosuka. And another one, he travels in California. He's a rapper. But we started a little label there in Japan, and we toured. We did a lot of little amateur shows there in Tokyo. We traveled to London. We went over to Korea. We traveled to Seoul. We performed there. And a lot of R&B, a lot of the pop things you see nowadays. But I guess my contribution to that was just a lot of the production. I was always interested in writing music, and I thought at that time I was going to be a film score composer. So that's what we are. Yeah, that's what was happening at that time in my life.
Wow. So that was a full 3 years of your life, and then 2007 comes. You decide to join the military. Was that decision easy to make at that point? Were you sort of knowing that you're done with music and that you want to sort of start a new chapter?
Well, I still wasn't quite ready to go to college. I did want to go to school, and so I actually had an area of focus that I wanted to study on. But I knew I couldn't just be traveling around Japan at the time, simply because I knew that there was an opportunity to be there for leadership potential in business. I would say. I think there's a trade-off with being in Japan and being in America, at least. In Japan, I feel like, I was respected a lot more in Japan as a person, at least being as an African American in Japan. I was able to walk more around with people and connect one-on-one, and people really saw me as people, but there was less opportunity there. I came back to America, and I feel like maybe I traded just a little bit of that respect just with the inherent culture that we have here. But there was more opportunity here for me, and I knew the best way to harness that opportunity was just to go ahead and join the military, get the training and the experience that it would give me, and then I could go back to my music if I wanted to, or a career would be waiting for me on the other side of that. So, decided to come back to America, moved back here to Texas, spent time with family for about 6 months, did some music here as well, and then went on the military from there.
Interesting. And you touched upon an interesting concept of, of race, right? And it's an ongoing concept throughout this podcast, right? Just in the last few episodes, we had a Swiss guy, we've had a Filipino guy, had a white guy, and like the various races, various, experiences. And you were just saying that in Japan, you felt like there was more respect. Do you mind elaborating a bit more on that point?
Well, on an individual level, I felt like in Japan, there wasn't an inherent cultural past that was tied to my interactions with people. So my interaction with the person is what dictated my character. I knew when I walked up to a Japanese person, especially since I spoke the language, there would be a level of more mutual respect. And I didn't have to overcome any barriers, already inherent barriers, just from any cultural stereotypes. In America, although individually, what I've seen are that people are really heartfelt in their interactions with people, but just because of the cultural biases that are already there tends to be interactions sometimes where people aren't aware of the mask that some people or some cultures have to put up sometimes. So, but it's dual natured with me, just because you see being in Japan, you see at different aspects of it. In Japan, if I'm learning the Japanese culture and I go interact with a Japanese person, you're told that you're just, you're acting, you're trying to learn the Japanese culture. But you come to America and you try to learn American culture, and then you get the other side of the racial spectrum where you're told you're acting white now. And it's like, wait a minute, I'm learning American culture. This is America. So there tends to be a race aspect of it on both sides of it. And I think especially there's some aspects that Black males don't get to talk about of it. But yeah, it's definitely there. And being in Japan just gave me, I guess, a more nuanced view of interacting in America itself, I guess.
That's incredibly intriguing, that idea of, obviously right now, as far as during our lifetime, I feel like, at least with the older folks, they say, sort of this topic of race and, police brutality has never been in the forefront. I mean, the closest comparison would be Rodney King, maybe 94, but obviously we were too young to remember that. Or we might remember it, but barely, right? We were like barely 10 years old. When it comes to being an African-American in this time, like what would you say, because you have this unique lens, right, of like living abroad and then living in the States, do you feel like when you came to the US, like back to the US, was there a reverse culture shock? Was there like sort of this thing that maybe you weren't aware of that you became aware of because you were abroad?
Oh, definitely. It's palpable when you come back to the US. I used to say when I first joined the Navy that I used the exact word, actually, it was a culture shock coming back to America. Being in Japan, culture there's a lot more collective. People take care of each other. You don't see trash on the street. People aren't yelling. People aren't angry at each other. They tend to help each other out. Kids, they go to elementary school by themselves. They're actually encouraged to do that. There's a lot of things, a lot of freedom of movement that you wouldn't see in America. So when you land in America, it's almost, especially as again, being an African American male, it's almost palpable, just the cultural biases that are there. They're not purposely wielded by people. Again, I think there's just certain threads that are woven in the fabric of cultures that are hard to untangle, even if people aren't using them themselves, that weigh on you. And I didn't realize racism actually existed until I moved to America, to be honest, because it felt different in Japan. In Japan, again, you have that respect. I saw worse things in Japan, like going around at night sometimes in Japan, you'd see bars that literally had signs on it that said no Black people allowed, right? But it didn't come with the same element of American history that you would think of. So when you see that in America, it comes with, just because of the history that there, it comes with a different quality. That quality is tangible. I can tell you when I go back to Japan, I can feel it lift. It's not even there. It's weird.
Yeah. And I think we could maybe both agree on the idea that sometimes people sort of look at, criticism towards Japan or the US, because I had a similar experience to you in regards to the reverse culture shock. I left Japan for a while, like 4 years. I came back, and then there were all these elements of Japanese culture. People had told me were negative, but I guess they never quite went into my head. And then as an adult, I was there in my 20s, just stuff like the rampant sexism at work and stuff. And I became more aware of that. But one thing I like to make clear to people is that, like, my criticism comes from a place of, like, love. It comes from a place that I want the country to be better. Just like I want the U.S. to be better. I'm not just like attacking them for the sake of attacking them, because I feel like that's the way sometimes, especially certain people have that interpretation, right? Any criticism is somehow looked upon as like, anti that country. And it's probably the exact contrary, that I think that criticism comes from a place where you want things, to improve. So yeah, with this concept of race, that's really interesting what you mentioned about the no black people allowed in the clubs. I haven't seen that since we were in high school.
Not clubs, small bars. Again, let me be honest. It was never big establishments, right? But it was still the fact that I would never see something like that in America. So you have small bars where sometimes they say no Americans, and sometimes they say no blacks. They're usually around military bases, and they're usually in places after crime has come. So you can't. You almost can't blame sometimes the reaction just because of, again, stereotypes that are out there. I know I've dated a couple of Japanese girls, and the only image that they had of my culture was what they see in the movies. And so there's a lot of undoing you have to do there sometimes.
That's really disappointing to hear, and that's still around. I mean, hopefully it'll be gone. In Korea, they have something similar too, the no foreigners. So for me, that's been a culture shock living here. This was like 2018, 2019 to get rejected from an establishment, right? And I'm like, I'm half Asian, which is minority, but I, more or less look like Nick Harris is a pretty white boy. Right? So there's this white boy getting rejected from an establishment, and I was just thinking, wow, like.
Well, you say that. I tell all my mixed race friends, being around the world, it's the interracial people that are getting it the worst. It's almost like they've got competing cultures not only with themselves, but they've got competing cultures they have to prove themselves externally. So it's a really weird thing. I think interracial people have it really hard right now.
It's a great point.
It's really untalked about, man.
Definitely, the whole like choosing your race and what to do. It's probably a new line, though. In a sense, it is also, embodying the progress we've made, too, though. Because I was just watching television the other day on Netflix. It was some teen show called 13 Reasons Why. And, like, half the cast is, like, half black and half white. And then, like, half Hispanic and half, like, Asian. I was wondering, there's nothing like what we grew up with, Seinfeld and Friends. Like, occasionally, one Asian character would show up for, like, 2 episodes, and they would, move to the next state over. They were part of the, cast. So, but I think, you bring up a great point. I think that itself could make a whole interesting podcast itself about mixed race people. So you're part of the military. And maybe you could start by just sort of educating the general audience as well as myself in regards to what exactly does this job involve.
All right. So I tell people all the time, if you've seen The Simpsons, you know exactly what I did, because Homer Simpson is actually a nuclear plant operator. And so when he's sitting at that panel, that's what he's watching is the gauges for a nuclear reactor. So I tell people that's pretty much who I was Homer Simpson of a submarine, at least. So we went underwater, but basically, the job of a nuclear reactor operator is to just measure the parameters of a reactor to ensure that they remain in levels that keep the reactor operating in a safe manner. So you've got different parameters such as temperature, pressure, just different power levels. different loads that you're putting on the reactor through your steam engines and your turbines from electrical power. And there's just this big weigh and balancing act that you're doing. I basically tell people I watch gauges. I'm not allowed to turn away from my panel. And if those gauges move, they have to figure out to put them back where they are. Other than that, I'm eating donuts like Homer.
Is that why I know of one other person who's done it, and this person was maybe in it for 2 years, 3 years. Is it that type of job where people do it for, no more than a few years and then move on because it's so stressful and because it's so high stakes?
We do have a high attrition rate. There's probably the highest attrition rate next to sales, to be honest. There are just a lot of, so not only is training intensive, so I started training in Chicago, for basic at least, in 2007. So I go from Chicago, I go to Charleston, South Carolina. You've got a year worth of training, which you have to go through. You're studying 60 to 80 hours a week. So it's basically college, but it's college on steroids, and you're doing it with people in uniform yelling at you the entire time. So I'm studying 60 hours a week for a year: electronic fundamentals, reactor fundamentals, heat transfer chemistry, various engineering subjects that go into reactor principles. I'm shipped off to New York. I sit in New York for 6 months. It's another school that you sit in where I actually operate a prototype of a reactor. So there's a prototype up there in northern New York where you train. Your last line before you get to the boat. So through these various stages, though, you're being tested at every point, and just because of the level of perfection and integrity that you expect people to have when they get to the boat, that testing is never there's never anything anybody that slips through. So there's an extremely high attrition rate, and then just because people get families sometimes, and they just they get things they have to go do, they can't really dedicate to the program as much. There's just a variety of reasons why people do leave. So by the time you get to the boat, you've been through 2 years worth of training, and you've lost 60 to 70% of the people you started with, to be honest. So.
Wow. But what happens to that 60, 70%? Are there more remedial jobs that they can sort of float into?
No, I don't want to call it remedial. It's not like they're lesser jobs, but you are definitely allowed. Well, you still qualified to be a nuke, which is a high standard for itself. So you're pretty much guaranteed to go any other job that you want from there. It's especially ones who actually came in and gave a valuable effort. There are some people who come in and they just quit, and we have a way in the Navy of knowing the people who aren't trying, and we make sure that they don't get the good deal, I guess, if you want to say that. But if you are a person that comes through and you've given it your all, there's no reason to punish you. So those people, I know I still keep in touch a lot. There's one that he was in IT after he got out. He works in the cryptology world, and now outside of the Navy at least. Some of them go on to work in auxiliary division to work with basic machinery, and got a lot of guys to go over to be missile techs and take care of the actual strategic assets that we launch from the submarines. Okay,
wow. So missile tech, cryptology, that's definitely not remedial by any stretch of the imagination.
Definitely not. So to be careful of the word. They go out and do great jobs.
Yeah. Since that sounds pretty badass. It sounds very Alan Turing, and
I tell people, I give people two movies to watch all the time if they really want to know what goes on. If you want to know the sheer fear aspect that you can have on a submarine from just being trapped underwater, watch Das Boot. It's a real old that's a foreign movie. I can't remember what I want to say it's German, but or French. I can't remember what language it's in. But Dasboot. It's Das Boot. Watch that movie. It's about a World War II submarine that you're basically watching the journey of that underwater. They're getting depth charged. You're watching them go on different missions. You're watching they make different port calls, and you feel like you're part of the journey of the boat. And then I tell people the most realistic submarine I've ever seen is Down Periscope. Although it's a comedy, it's incredibly accurate of what submarine life is like. So.
Really?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, that's Boot and the comedy movie, huh?
Yeah, down to the fact that we're all down Periscope, down to the fact that somehow we're all stooges, and somehow this incredible machine still works.
So you leave the Navy and you head over to Arizona, new life, similar jobs, right, in regards to sort of the techiness, at least from my view as a teacher. I know it's not being in a submarine. I know I saw your face for a moment. You're like, what is he talking about? But it's still, in the tech sector.
I'm actually laughing because it's exactly the same thing, basically. It's same electromechanical equipment, just different end product.
Next year on land too, right? So
exactly.
you go from underwater to on land, and a major event happens, and I think it's better sort of coming from you than from me. So if you want to sort of share with the audience what happened to you in Arizona and how that sort of has affected your life plan as well as your life during that time period.
Yeah, so I'm in Arizona. I moved there. I got out the Navy. Decided to start working for Intel. Intel basically produces microprocessors and different electronic processes for computers around the world, CPUs. I'm sure many people have their products in their computers. So joined the factory there. I'm a technician. Gung ho in life. Working. I'm going to school online for trying to get my bachelor's in nuclear engineering technology. Everything's pretty solid, stable life. I go out to a bar one night. I'm out with some friends. This is where where things start to get palpable, just because certain situations I can't respond in certain ways to people because it rises in them a level of just fear, and sometimes just consequences that I don't want to deal with. But one particular night, we were at a bar. One of my friends got into a scuffle with someone. Words were being exchanged. Normal, any other country, that this would probably be a bar fight, and two men buy each other beer, and that would have been the end of it. But this guy, I come over to stop my friend from fighting. This guy looks over and sees, the group that he's with, becomes terrified after that. He pulls out a weapon, and he starts shooting the group in the middle of this crowded bar. So 5 people end up getting shot that night, and I was one of the ones included in that. Unfortunately, I received a bullet in the chest, a couple inches from my lung. Took a while to recover. I was paralyzed on the left side for a while. Spent some time, a lot of time in the hospital, a lot of time out of work, just healing. And it was a big that moment really was life-altering experience that changed my life. I went from being just normal ex-sailor, going to college, having a career, to now I have an inner reality to start contending with. So, and it was a big awakening experience for me, if you want to call it that.
Incredible that just how quickly that happened, and how you mentioned off air just how innocuous the situation was. Right? It's just a regular bar, and I think it connects to a lot of what other stuff we've talked off air about, sort of the culture of violence, right? And again, that's a loaded word, and I'm sure there's different ways people can interpret that, but it's just crazy to think that you went to go have some drinks and then you left. Fortunately, it didn't hit any vital organs, but you said it hit the left shoulder or close left chest, and had these effects. And once this events transpired, you said your mindset shifted. Right? You kind of went from job, finished that master's. So, in what ways, once the healing, at least a degree of the healing took place, both mentally and physically, what was your next step? And how was that step affected by that event?
Well, I think really it put me on a proper path of what was probably more internally accurate for me. I'm more of an empath, and somehow I have no idea how I've made it through the engineering world as an empath. Definitely had my struggles going through that, and I hate quoting MBTI. I'd have my disagreements with it sometimes, but I'd probably be an strong INFJ if I were to score myself on that. So being an empath in the engineering world, I think I mask a lot of things that going through that trauma released a lot of different traumas that were lying in beneath the surface of that. So I think it put me on a path to start helping other intuitive people, creative people, empaths who are stuck in logical, industrialized society that we have now. I feel like the only creative outlets that people really do get, that we get, your pop songs and the bar, nightlife that we have, the entertainment there. But when it comes to creative people in our society, it's their outlets are becoming really fewer in between. And I think that's why, at least here in America, we're seeing a rise in a lot of, what I guess psychologists would call cluster B type disorders. And those are creative people that they're affecting. So it revealed to me that there were a lot of, not only did I get over the trauma of that, but dealing with that got me over just other repression that I had to deal with from being in the technical world as an empath. So I really wanted to help empaths after that. I really wanted to go connect with other highly emotional and highly creative men, highly intelligent men who were having the same troubles in the technical world, I guess.
And so when this all happened in Arizona, and was
Correct.
this partly why you made this transition to Austin, was sort of to begin a new sort of focus on, obviously your career is still quite similar, but outside of your career, you also have spoken off air a bit about, so I'm going to rephrase that. In the introduction, you mentioned about, maybe one day having sort of like a nonprofit or a non-governmental organization relative to helping youth. In what ways has that taken place the last few years? And, how did you get the ball rolling? How do you basically find people that need help?
Somehow I just I think sometimes empaths tend to attract people in their life that I've always been a helper. I think I used to, even in the Navy, I remember I used to get in trouble from my roommates because I'd be the person bringing homeless people down from the street sometimes so they could sleep on my couch for a night, just to have a cot and a hot meal for a night, just because I felt bad passing him. I was that guy that was getting in trouble for that all the time. So I was just always surrounded by people that I wanted to help. After that incident, started talking with people about just the knowledge I learned, and I think other people started sharing that. I started really mixing in my engineering knowledge with the world of the emotions, because me having a technical mind, at least, I wanted to know. I didn't want to just go through the therapies. I wanted to know systemically, like, why they worked. I wanted to know what emotions are. I wanted to know why these processes work. Not just go through it. This would work. I wanted to know the technical details, I guess, of it. So I really started researching on how electricity and emotions are intimately connected. I mean, to go into base algebra, we all had algebra class where we had the letter I, the imaginary number, inside your math equations, and that number is vital. Some of your equations will not work without that number. We know that number isn't real. We know we can't see or feel that number, but we know that number is concrete and it's vital to see that number. And in the electrical world, it's also vital to your equations in the electrical world. It's where you store an immense amount of energy is stored in that number, and when you have electrical systems. So I transferred that knowledge to just during my healing, and I realized that that's where emotions were stored. Emotions are an actual energy. How do I put that? Emotions are actual. They're power. They're actual energy stored in the apparatus around the body, and there's technical languages and equations about that. So I started going around and I was talking to all the naturopaths and Phoenix about this. Some of them went to the Southwest Institute for Naturopathic Medicine. It's one of the few naturopathic institutes for healing, in America at least. And I was talking with a lot of just, the residents there and the doctors, of sharing my knowledge. And just as I was going through my healing process, talking to them because I wanted to learn the processes to heal, and just sharing the knowledge that I had of engineering, there was just huge transfer of data between us. And that's, I think, what inspired me. That's when I knew what I wanted to do. And that's when I moved to Austin. I moved to Austin here. I'm currently doing some research on just how electricity actually affects food. And I want to go from there, just try to start developing technologies that will help regulate emotions within the body. Just because I don't feel like we have, or I know we don't have any devices, any devices that are out there to regulate people other than pharmaceuticals, to be honest.
So that's interesting that there's this big focus on food and mental well-being. What else have you sort of researched when it comes to what we consume and how it affects our mental health?
Well, what comes to just the life quality of food. So food. I'll put it in the perspective from coming from Asia to coming to America. And remember in Japan, remember food tasting different in Japan. You could tell that food came straight from the farm and it came to the market there, and just there was a lot more care. Care does matter in your food, but there was just a lot more attention to detail to make sure that food is in its most natural state. And I see this in a lot of countries except for America. America food is tend to be treated as almost as an object, just like you would find in Walmart. As long as the shell of the food looks good, then the food itself must be good. But traveling around, again, I traveled in those 2 years, and I could tell the difference of food between different shops. You can walk into Whole Foods, you could literally see just the quality of people who operate, or how they operate when they eat that food. And then you can walk into a lower income neighborhood where they're not so fortunate to get the freshest quality food, and you can see how the effects they have on their body. So there's a different reason why people pay for fresher quality food. And I wanted to figure out how to get America on ball with the rest of the world when it comes to food quality. So
that seems to be deeply entwined with the idea of inequity and the different socioeconomic statuses and how that affects what one consumes. Is when you're doing this research on food, even to the layperson, it's clear that Whole Foods quality of food is better than McDonald's. But is there something maybe especially insidious about American culture and food in the States?
So it's not particular to the States. It's for us, it's our regulatory processes. Our food we have built-in structure into our bureaucracy to make sure that our food is handled a certain way. It can't not be handled how do I put that? So we have certain regulatory processes that make sure our food are handled in a certain way. So this kind of kills the food when we're talking about long distance travel, and you wouldn't see that in foreign countries because the food comes straight from the farm to the table. There's a lot of, you travel Europe, there's a lot of places that, it's still mom and pop, they're operating their own farms, and they're able to sell their food without having to go through those same regulatory processes. If I were here in America and I wanted to just grow something and bring it to the market, there's different licenses I would have to get. There's people I would have to prove to that my food is of a certain quality. And that just pushes a lot of small growers out of the market just because they can either afford the time nor the effort to go through that regulatory barrier. So I think it pushes a lot of you wouldn't see that, and you don't see that in other countries. People are able just to grow food and provide their own populace with food without going through those hoops and hurdles.
So that ironically, the regulations that are meant to be there to sort of protect the well-being in regards to our food consumption are hurting us. And I totally concur, having lived in Honduras, which is not, the most, in regards to regulation, it's not like anything from the justice system to food is regulated very well, but their food's very good. Because as you said, they just, they make their food and gets to the kitchen and then it gets into my stomach. And it's a much more streamlined process.
It comes down to vibrancy, man. You can really, I call it vibrance. You can see people when they eat vibrant food, they're more vibrant. You go to some cultures, you go to places like Okinawa where they've been eating the same way for hundreds of years. And you can see that the people not only do they have longevity, but they have a certain vibrancy just to the way they look, but in the way they act. Here in America, we do a wonderful job of killing everything in our food to make sure it doesn't get us sick, but we kill our food. So when you eat that food, there's really no life processes in the food for the body to rebuild the life within itself. And if you're not rebuilding life, it's a lot of the reasons why people aren't able to regenerate their emotional state, which is exacerbating a lot of just the mental health issues we have here in America. You're also not able to regenerate your physical state. And so that's why we see obesity going, and like if you go to the lower income neighborhoods in America, this is what we're seeing. We're seeing, the mental disorders come out, and we're seeing obesity and just the complications that come with that.
Yeah, I think you've definitely targeted, the root of the problem of like so many other problems, right? Of poor neighborhoods, violence. But you're actually really, it is sort of coming to me now that I'm starting to think about food, and I'm starting to think about with very wealthy people, a lot of them now, there's sort of this trend of growing their own food. I don't know if you follow like Joe Rogan, for example. I know he grows a lot of his own food, and then he not only does that, but shoots his own elk. All right, so he knows if you kill your own food, then you know there's no middleman. So deeply, but
and it's so simple that people would wonder why. I get a lot of questions sometimes on how I could go through so much of the trauma that I went through, and that's the answer that I came up with. But just the people that I've gone through healing with, it's the first thing you always do with people. You know, it's you got to give them good food, and you got to get whatever drugs or addictions that they got out of them. And once you clear people of those two things, 80 to 90% of people's problems go away. They have a moment where they are emotionally detoxing, and it's incredibly uncomfortable for them as they're dealing with just the traumas that are releasing out of them. But most of the times when you give people just good food, you take the drugs out of their system, people are okay most of the times. So a lot of complications could just be cleared up just from that simple cultural issue.
Is there anything that you do on a daily basis that helps your food consumption and that other people could sort of emulate without, spending too much money or too much time?
So, I try to cook everything. So if I can't, if it's not alive when I grab it out of the grocery store, other than my meat, I try not to eat it anymore. I have myself moved into intermittent fasting. So I try to cram all my meals within 8 to 12 hours, depending on how tired I am at my shift. And I try not to go too complex anymore. I mean, I've done a lot of experimenting with just different diets, so I try not to get too complex nowadays. Just eat a balanced diet, eat a lot of carbs for my first meal. That's just to get, the sugar and the carbohydrates that I need to actually run through my day. Me being a leaner type of body, I need those carbohydrates anyway. And then I usually, have a work session. I'll work out. Then that's when I'll eat my meat and vegetables. I tell people all the time, the way I personally separate my food groups are just fruit is for rebuilding your nerves. There's a lot of anxious people out there who aren't. Anxiety comes from nerves. One of the things, a lot of the minerals and the antioxidants you need to rebuild those nerves and to flush out everything to recalm those nerves are in fruit. So fruit, vegetables are what's going to be rebuilding just the different blood processes and plasma processes in your body. And then meat and your carbs are exactly what's building the actual body. So you've got to eat all three. And I tell people, depends on what you're doing is what you should be eating. If you're going to go sit down and study, you want nerve food. And so you need to cut some fruit, get some bananas and some oranges before you study. You don't want to eat a big heavy meal. But if I'm doing something more bodily process, then I go work out, then I need, some good meat, some carbs after that. But then there are some people who live neutral lives. They're not extremely active. They're not extremely or extremely docile, and they do quite well with just vegetarian lives. They don't need, they don't strain themselves. They don't do too much fruit, but not working out too much. And so the vegetarian diet works for them. So it just really depends on your body. That's why I try not to put collective information out there, because I don't want it to get dogmatic, because it truthfully depends on the person.
That's a great point. That, the athlete's going to eat differently than the brainiac. But then I guess if you're both, then you got to do some that. So at the end here, I like to sort of wrap things up by having the guests sort of tell us what is coming up in their lives in the next few years, as well as next few decades. So, Brenden, if you want to take it away, tell us what is on the horizon.
Definitely, man. So the project I'm working around is, again, I brought up the gardening project. I'm really interested on how electricity and magnetism affects food. So this perfect time to start a garden because of what's going on in the world. I already had a plan for it. It kind of accelerated the pace of it, I guess. I went and dug out my turn garden bed. I put some magnets in there. If you magnetize food in the correct order, you can accelerate its growth. I also built a structure that operates like a solar cell that injects electricity into food. I've got to sit in my backyard. And I had my first grow season, and the rate of crop growth was ridiculous. I had all kind of neighbors coming over. That's how I got my tomatoes so big. Corn, the corn I grow usually it's supposed to only have 2 to 3 ears of corn on it. All my corn, I'll have to provide you some pictures later, but they've got 5 and 6 years growing off my corn, healthy years at that. just the rate of growth my food had. So I'm trying to the next year come up with the projects and start teaching people how electricity affects their emotional state and how they can regenerate it through food. So be looking up for hopefully some videos explaining that project and a book coming out here hopefully next year.
Wow, that sounds like a really cool project. And yeah, I'd love to see the pictures of this corn you speak of.
I was mad. I wanted to send it to you. I wanted to, because yesterday was a full. I've been trying to make it a habit of playing on full moons, just based off the old Farmer's Almanac way. But it was raining here down in Austin, so I couldn't go out there and plant, take pictures for you and get them to you for this session. But when I do plant, I can tell you, I'll give you some an update on how that project has already been going.
Sounds good. We'll just add it in the little doobly-doo in the YouTube and maybe on the website too. So it was great catching up with you. So many topics. First, Dodd's guest of Tokyo. Thank you for being our first Dodd guest. Tokyo family, even though you're not Tokyo, it's okay. For us, it's Kanto, right?
I will. With people hear the way you talk, I'm sure they'll inspire some more guests to come knock at your door.
So again, yeah, thank you for coming on. And that was guest number 34, Brenden Lynce, graduate of Kinnick, 2004, and.